welcome you all to all the participants who have connected us for a webinar on the topic of construction contracts, typical issues. And as those who have been connected with us, they know that during this lockdown, we have been holding webinars on different perspectives of law and beyond law, which could be, we feel that has some semblance or would help any person for the insights. Issues regarding law have been taken, communication, etc., have been taken. So in that entire endeavor is that the persons who have made their niche in that field, they should be asked to give their insights on the topic so that the issues which are sometimes for a novice, he will get an insight, and one who is an expert will get better insights from an expert. Amongst us, we have Anirudh Krishnan. He has already been on this platform earlier, and we have caught up again on this platform. And his father also gave an insights, and both the webinars have been well received. Through Mr. Anirudh, we have been connected to Mr. Rohit Singhal, because once the issue of construction contracts came into being, we thought that the relations could only be constructed if there are better people to connect through. So he said that Mr. Rohit Singhal is a good person for having the issues regarding the construction. And once you Google out, you come to know his expertise in his own way. He has an international experience on contract issues. His expert testimonies is being considered. These issues of late, especially after the COVID-19, will have a different gamut, which of course we all like to learn in this process. So once the knowledge regarding the legal aspects as well as the expert come through, two experts, it will be always a pleasure. Without taking much time, I will ask Mr. Anirudh Krishnan to give the insights on the legal aspects, and then Mr. Rohit Singhal will give the insights. Thereafter, we would be having question answer sessions, wherein the questions posed either could be on the Facebook, since we are live on the Facebook, or on the chat box itself. Those questions, we will make all our endeavors that they would be resolved. I request Mr. Anirudh Krishnan to take over the baton and take the things forward.
Thank you, Mr. Vikas. It's always a pleasure to be in the Beyond CLC webinars. Last time I'd spoken on force majeure and frustration, and had gone into these concepts. Now I look forward to this interesting webinar, an interesting topic on construction arbitrations, and I specifically look forward to the interaction with Mr. Rohit Singhal, who is a leading delay analyst in the country, and I would say even in the, I would extend beyond the country, because he's testifying in arbitrations all over the world. So since you mentioned to me that it's better I start from the basics, I prepared a short PowerPoint on how to build up a construction claim. And also I want to go through some of these issues that regularly come up in a construction arbitration. Is my screen visible?
Yes, perfect.
All right. Yeah. So there are broadly two very common issues that arise in most construction arbitrations. The first are delay-related claims, and the second are variations-related claims. I will be spending a little more time on delays, as these tend to be a lot more complex. I will briefly be explaining issues pertaining to variations as well. So when you look at building a case for breaches arising out of delays caused by one of the parties, you will have to look at three aspects. The first is establishing breach. You will have to identify the clause that has been breached, and you will have to prove that there has been breach. The second is to establish causation. You will have to show that in fact the breach caused the loss, because you may have a breach that causes no loss. So that the second limb is where experts like Mr. Rohit Singhal come in, because they will have to show through delay analysis that in fact the breach that has been established caused the loss. The third is, what is the quantum of loss? If you've now established that some loss has been caused, how do you then prove the quantum of loss? Because each of these can be quite specialized in a construction claim. I'll come to variations later, because I'll first deal with delay. So there are three aspects that I've set out: breach, causation, and quantification. So let me start off with breach, because this is the foundation of your claim. If you can't establish breach, the rest of it becomes irrelevant, because you're not entitled to any compensation, right? So first thing to do is to identify the contractual clauses and then check if that contractual clause has been breached. Now, there are multiple common issues that arise in most construction arbitrations. The first issue that you see in a number of cases is delay in handing over land, right? So before I get into this, so what do I mean by a delay related claim? Contract is to be completed in 24 months. Contract goes on for 36 months. If the contractor can show that that 12 months of delay was attributable to the employer, then the contractor can claim delay damages. But for this, he'll have to establish that in fact the delay is attributable to the employer, and that this is a result of the employer's breach of contract. So one of the very common delays that arises is delay in handing over land, right? What I have done in my presentation is I've taken clauses that I have come across in multiple arbitrations and put them in, because these are all part of general conditions of contract of various public sector undertakings. So this may give the viewers a taste of the nature of clause that we are dealing with, right? So one typical clause could be this: the owner will hand over to the contractor within 1 week from the date of issue of letter of intent some areas as available at site, to enable the contractor to make arrangements for store, site office, etc. at his own cost. So there is a timeline specified of how land shall be handed. Some parts of the land shall be handed over within 1 week. Now let us assume that the entire land was handed over only after 2 months, right? The breach over here is the fact that the employer failed to hand over some portion of the land within 1 week. The time for this individual breach, assuming that the land was handed over after 2 months, is the 2 months minus 1 week, right? So that would be the period of the breach. You may have multiple variants of such clauses. Like I have come across in some contracts, especially these metro contracts, there'll be a diagram as to which portion of the land would be handed over on what date. So in some situations, there are other provisions which set out further details. So you will have to go by the specific clause to say, employer, you were supposed to hand over on so and so date, you did not. So you will have to show that clause. Then you will have to show proof of actual handover. So usually when it is handed over, either both parties sign off on a register, or there is some email or letter that recognizes the fact that on that particular date handover has taken place. So as a contractor, you will have to show this is the clause. As per this clause, it was to be handed over on this date. This letter shows in fact that it is handed over 20 days late, and therefore there's a breach of contract. The other very common issue that arises is delay in providing drawings. So one example of a clause is provided here. See, insofar as drawings are concerned, very often the clauses will say that drawings have to be handed over periodically, because it's very rare where the design responsibility is on the employer. It is very rare that all the drawings are handed over on day one. But in the absence of any schedule mentioned anywhere, you will then have to, there are certain guidelines that you can go by. Usually there is a baseline program that is submitted, and that will set out the timeline for submitting drawings. Sometimes there is a 60 days, sometimes there is a 90 days. There will be a timeline set out. Now there is a passage in two of the leading books on construction contracts, Hudson and Keating, which says that in the absence of any specification in the contract itself, since the baseline schedule is an agreed upon schedule, that is deemed to be incorporated into the contract. And so you can use that as a basis in order to prove breach in handing over, delay in handing over drawings. Now, to establish that drawings were handed over late is quite easy. Usually there's a drawing register that is maintained. There's also a transmission date. So in the drawing itself, you will see on the right bottom, usually the date on which it was actually handed over. So it's quite easy to establish the date. It only requires a lot of effort and some meticulous preparation, because you need to know which drawing was handed over on what date. Then if you compare that with the baseline schedule, you will know whether there was a delay or whether there was a breach or not. The third is delay due to belated supply of materials. Let me now run through it. So there's a clause that provides that certain specific components must be handed over by the employer. That was delayed. Other delays would include delay in approval of samples. This is and materials. So sometimes the contract would say that certain specific material, especially when you look at a lot of these metro rail contracts, they will talk about specific kinds of granite that is supposed to be used. You will have Sadarhalli granite, you will have black granite. So these will have to be approved by the employer once the samples are procured by the contractor. Now, if there is a delay in approval, obviously the work will get delayed. And since approval is a contractual prerequisite, delay in approval is also something that is that would also be construed as a breach. Usually there's a time frame specified. Otherwise, you go both by the practice in relation to the contract and general market practice. And there again, you can have experts like Mr. Rohit testify on what would be the market standard and how there has been something beyond that. So that's where usually, otherwise, insofar as establishing breach is concerned, the expert evidence would not be required. It will be required more on the causation side. Then there is delay due to increase in quantities. Now, this is quite common. An example I can give you is if a 250 crore contract becomes a 500 crore contract, then obviously there's going to be almost doubling of time. In fact, as per the guidelines set out by CPWD, 100% increase in quantity results in a 125% increase in time. The rationale is that if you know the quantities in advance, you plan your mobilization in advance. But if the quantities get added on an ad hoc manner during the contract, it takes that little extra time to mobilize. Therefore, there are guidelines which say that 100% increase in quantities results in a 125% increase in time. So these are all guidelines that are there which show how much of a delay was caused, and all of these can be used in the next stage of causation. Right. Then, in addition to I mentioned delay in approval of drawings, you also have delay owing to revision in drawings. The employer gives you a drawing in the beginning. 3 weeks later, the employer says, "No, hold on, I need to change." Then that takes revision in drawings takes some time. That's another common breach. And delay due to hold in fronts. Delay due to hold in fronts can occur due to multiple reasons. One could be if it is a delay owing to, say, approval of drawings, or there's a change in design, then there could be a hold that could be declared. Or the most common is where there are multiple contractors that are operating, one person doing civil works, one person doing electrical and mechanical works. Then you may have the electrical and mechanical contractor occupying the site, and therefore the civil contractor will be forced to delay. So there are multiple kinds of holds that are possible, but these are the common kinds of breaches. Now, as a lawyer, when you're working on a construction claim, it's important to categorize and segregate your document based on the breach. So what we usually do is we create a convenience volume of documents, because otherwise you can easily get overwhelmed by the volume of documents that are before you. When you're preparing a civil suit, which involves, say, 2 breaches or 2 causes of action, then it's possible to have one common dates and events. You may have 100 or 150 pages. It's easier to handle. But when the documentation runs to 20,000 pages, it's going to be impossible for you to have one common dates and events and proceed on that basis, because there's going to be utter confusion. So how you go about it is you split it based on breach. You have a master chronology. You also create an individual chronology for each breach and have an individual convenience compilation for each breach. So you have effectively broken down one 20,000 page case into 20,000 page cases, which becomes a lot easier to handle, right? Therefore, my advice to any lawyer approaching a construction claim when it comes to establishing breach would be identify the clauses, identify the documents that prove breach, identify all other correspondence, contemporaneous correspondence relating to that breach, and create a separate volume and keep it away right at the beginning when you're preparing a statement of claim. That makes your job much easier through the arbitration, right? Now, in some cases, these are all tricks that you learn along the way, especially when the other side is a public sector undertaking. You will notice that there are implicit admissions that are there which you can make use of straight away. For instance, if there is a delay, and at that stage of seeking an extension of time, the contractor points out the breaches, and ultimately the employer, one, does not deny any of this, and 2, goes ahead and pays price escalation or price variation for the extended period, then he is implicitly agreeing that the delay is not because of the contractor. Because if the delay is because of the contractor cannot then claim price variation. So you need to study all of these to see whether you can establish an implicit admission. Admissions may even be explicit, and a lot of these are contained in internal file notings of public sector undertakings, and this can be a gold mine. I have won arbitration just on the basis of internal file notings, internal reports, because when a public sector undertaking delays a project, they will have to establish to various authorities. Sometimes the CVC would ask them, why is there a delay? They would establish the reasons for the delay. Very often they would have put down reasons that show that the reason is not attributable to the contractor. All of these as documents to prove the breach of the employer directly without getting into any minute details. But for this, what is very, very crucial is the discovery process during trial and the cross-examination. A lot of people say cross-examination is not that relevant in a construction contract because everything is borne out by documents. I would completely disagree with this. I think that it's very, very crucial, especially to bring out admissions. The second aspect, so now I move beyond breach to causation, which I will deal with very briefly because that is more in Rohit's domain. So when you have the expert, you might as well hear it from the horse's mouth. Now, in causation, you will show that in fact the particular breach has caused loss. Let me give you a simple example. You need to construct a room, and the construction contract also includes the constructing of the employer has to provide the tables, and then the tables have to be fitted in. Okay, let's assume that the contract says in 12 months this has to be concluded, and there is a delay in construction of the room by an additional 3 months. So the whole January to December is the timetable. The work spills over from January 19 to December 19 is the timetable. The work spills over to March 20, just the construction of the room spills over to March 20. The table was to be ready and provided by the employer by October 19. There is a delay of 3 months in that as well. That gets pushed to January. Now, which of these delays has actually caused the loss? Because both parties are in breach. Both parties are in breach because the employer did not provide the table in time. The contractor did not get the room ready in time. This is a very obvious case that I'm giving you. Obviously, without the room being ready, you can't fit in the table. Therefore, in the example that I've given you, the contractor's breach is the dominant breach, and the contractor will be responsible for the delay. But this is a very simple example. Now replace the room with a power plant with 32 civil structures. And in relation to each civil structure, there are multiple delay events from both sides. How do you then establish which is the dominant cause for the loss? There are multiple methodologies involved, and Rohit will be going into those, so I'm not going to be getting into it. I have a couple of slides on it, but I think I'll skip over and move because I have a lot of other things to cover. So now, the only thing that I would like to say is that in a number of arbitrations, you may be able to prove causation based on just a careful analysis of the EOT correspondence, because again, there are very often PSUs are not very careful in the documentation. There are implicit admissions contained there. You may also be able to establish this through specific clauses in the contract. Let me give you an example. One of the metro arbitrations that I had done, there is a clause which says that extension of time can be under clause 1, clause A, if it is owing to the contractor, and clause B if it is owing to the employer. Now, the employer, while granting the extension of time, had granted it under clause B and had also set out the time period of the extension. So in a case like this, you don't have to get into too much of causation because the employer admits that the delay is caused by him. The minute that admission is there, causation becomes much easier to establish. Of course, with the employers who are much more careful, you may not have such admissions, and you will then have to get into complicated methodologies that Rohit will be dealing with. Right? So now I move on to the third limb. You established breach, you established causation. Now you need to establish what is the actual loss that is caused to you. How do you quantify it? Right? So when you look at all the leading textbooks, they split it into two costs, direct cost and indirect cost. So when you're looking at direct cost, you have escalation. So therefore, steel and cement cost 100 rupees on day one during the contract period because of the delay. So had the contract completed in 24 months, you would have been able to procure it at 100 rupees, but it goes on for 36 months. Price of cement and steel goes up to 120 rupees. Therefore, that additional 20 rupees you can claim as price escalation. Usually there's a price variation clause or an escalation formula that is contained in the contract. If it is such a formula is there, then you'll have to work out in accordance with the formula. If it is not there, then you can claim based on actuals. Right? Usually in most contracts, there is a formula. Then other kinds of direct costs are idling of labor and machinery. So the labor that I had at site would have got me, should have been there only for 24 months. But in fact, the labor was there for much more than 24 months. It was there for 36 months. Therefore, my labor was not as productive as it should have been. Right? There are multiple ways of proving the amounts. I'll come to that. Similarly for machinery, similarly for shuttering, and for site overheads. All of these are direct costs. The site overheads would be site office, the cost of the local engineer that you've hired at site to oversee the work, the project manager. All of these will come under site overheads. Then you have indirect cost. Indirect cost, broadly two heads: head office overheads and loss of profits. Head office overheads would include your contract management team sitting in your head office in Bombay that does your claim management, that does your supervisory work from there. Your accounts team that may be based remotely that handles this. So all of these are broadly, there are formula, and I'll be dealing with those briefly. Then you have loss of profits. A more accurate term is, it's commonly called loss of profit, but actually loss of profit earning capacity. The rationale for this is that in 24 months, so let's assume that the project is for 240 crores. 24 months, you would have got a rough profit of 10%. So 24 months, you would have made 24 crores. 1 month, you would have made 1 crore. In 24 months, you should have made 24 crores and left the site, but you were forced to stay on site for another 12 months. Had you deployed your resources in another contract of 12 months, you would have earned 12 crores. Therefore, that is your loss of profit earning capacity. The calculation, what I've explained to you, is essentially Hudson formula. Then you have some contracts that refer to revision of rates, where you factor all these costs in and you say, this was the original rate in this item rate contract, but now the rate must be revised to be so much, right? So that revision of rates would essentially be factoring in all these considerations and adding it to your original rate. Now, for quantification, it's very crucial for you to have backup invoices. Right? Usually, most contractors were only referring to entries in their SAP system, the computerized accounting system that provided the various heads. Very often, backup invoices were not produced. Very often, they would get an auditor to file a certificate saying, I have verified this and it is true, right? Now, there is a huge risk in this. In fact, if you look at the judgment of the Bombay High Court in Afcons Mumbai Port Trust, the award would have been set aside on the basis that the auditor was not produced for cross-examination. He was not produced as a witness. Therefore, there's no authenticity to the statement made by him, and actual invoices were not produced. So it's very crucial that it will be voluminous, but you need to produce it. At least what you need to do is you provide samples to show correlation with the extracts and make the chartered accountant testify as a witness. Then it's okay. Then you have covered your base, right? So how do you calculate? Now for loss of profits and overheads, you have multiple formulas such as Hudson, Emden, Eichli formula. Escalation as well, you have some formulae. Now, for others, such as idling, there's a very neat formulation set out in Keating in construction contracts, where they say, what is the actual cost minus notional expenditure? For this, you need to get into what is the pre-start estimate. There are pre-start estimates which companies maintain based on which their calculation is done at the tender stage. So you would say that, okay, 4% is going to be spent on shuttering material, 4% of the overall cost. So you will then say 4% of 240 crores comes to X. I have actually spent Y. Therefore, the loss that I've suffered is Y minus X. Right? I've just set out a working example. Right? So in this example of 24-month contract, 236.41 crores contract value, actual value went up. So you will this is for looking at shuttering, looking at all other direct costs. You can go by what is set out in Keating using the pre-start estimate. The only thing you need to keep in mind is you need to prove your pre-start estimate by getting somebody from the tendering team to step into the box and testify, right? Otherwise, you can use formulae such as Hudson's formula. Hudson's is the most commonly used. What the example that I gave you was breaking down Hudson's formula into ratio percentage. Hudson's formula is nothing but ratio percentage. So percentage of profit into contract sum into period of delay by contract period. Now profit is, Supreme Court has recognized that profit can be treated to be between 10 to 15%. You have judgments such as JG Engineers that recognize this. So what is this calculation? Instead of looking at this as a complicated formula, let's look at it from first principles. 236 crores, let's assume it's 240 crores. 240 crores in 24 months means 10% would be the profit, 24 crores would be the profit. Per month, you're making profit of 1 crore. Delay is 26 months. Therefore, in 26 months where you had to stay at site, you would have made 26 crores as profit. That is the loss of profit earning capacity. This is based on Hudson. I have just broken it down as ratio proportion. Now, again, these are all extensive topics that you can deal with for 1 hour, 1.5 hours each. So I'm not going to go into each of those because I want to run through some of the other issues before handing it over to Rohit. Now, variations. Let me quickly run through this. You have variations in, you can have additional work. So for instance, if contractually you're supposed to say provide for 100 units of steel, but 100 units becomes 1,000 units, then that can be treated to be a variation in quantities. Usually in an item rate that's paid based on the BOQ rate. It only becomes a challenge when it's a lump sum contract where you'll have to carefully analyze the provisions to see how you can make this claim. Then you have an extra item that is new work altogether. So for instance, there is an extra structure that is sanctioned that was not originally part of the contract. Then you have substituted items. So for instance, this is a live example. Instead of black granite at counters, Sadar Halli granite had to be used, and Sadar Halli granite was more expensive. So these are the various kinds of variations. What you need to keep in mind is contemporaneously you will have to notify the variations to the other side, because there's usually a contractual clause by which you will have to notify within a stipulated period. You also have to build contemporaneous correspondence regarding every variation. Now, there are multiple methods of calculation. You have to go by the contract, but various methods that are set out are sometimes, okay, if this item is available in a standard schedule of rates, like CPWD rates, then that rate would be taken for the new item because there is no other, or sometimes they'll say if there's a similar item, you use the rate specified in the BOQ for the similar item. A third could be actuals plus some percentage for wastage, transportation, and overheads. So you have, again, there is no preset formula. It is dependent on the individual contract. I have come across all three. I have come across a combination of all three as well. For instance, some of the contracts will say that if there is a new item, if there is a similar item, you go by the BOQ. If there is no similar item, you go by the standard schedule of rates. If there is nothing in the standard schedule of rates, then you go by actuals with 10% for wastage, transportation, and overheads. Right? So there are multiple methodologies. You have to look at the individual contract for it. Now, let me look at some typical issues that arise in construction arbitration. I'm just going to run through this because I know I'm short of time. Another 5 minutes should be okay, Vikas? Is that okay? 5 minutes? Yeah. I can't hear you. Okay. The typical.
In fact, I muted this thing. People were saying that there was disturbance. I muted myself also.
5 minutes should be okay, right?
If you feel the topic is an issue, I believe that you can complete the topic rather than taking Q&A, because once the points are cleared, that makes more sense rather than running this thing through.
Okay.
And we are taking into the questions. It's better that the clarity is much better.
I take about 10 minutes then.
Because I've seen that where the topic is explained in a more clarificatory manner, then the questions are also less. So
Okay.
that sums up in the both ways. So it's better we continue with the topic and there is more clarity.
Okay. So so far I've dealt with the basic.
Like I've been seeing, Anirudh, that you have been showing the judgments in the these slides. So if you could just cite it down, because otherwise I would be requesting for the slides also. But those judgments will give a flip that the participants can note it down.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Now, so now essentially what I've dealt with is the various kinds of variations. Very briefly, I've dealt in some detail with delay and how you need to establish three things. The breach, for which first you need to identify the clause, then identify all the documents to establish breach, and then segregate each of those. So the first aspect is breach. The second aspect is causation, that is the breach caused the loss. And the third aspect is quantification. How do you prove the actual amount of loss caused? So these are the three aspects on delay that I've gone into in some detail. I quickly went through the variations. Now let me look into some typical issues that arise in a construction arbitration. So the first is lack of contemporaneous documentation and failure to raise a claim contemporaneously. So you will have a number of cases where for the first 4 years of the contract, there'll be no documentation. And then they will either go to a expert like Rohit, or they'll come to a lawyer wanting to prepare some documents. And then we will say, well, there are these delays. So then claims are built up thereafter. And this very often proves fatal to a case, because contemporaneous documents are absolutely critical, because it shows what the parties thought of at a time when there was no dispute, right? And I'm sure Rohit will be going into this, the second aspect. There is often a lot of the lack of data that is maintained, especially to prove the impact of parallel delays, concurrent delays, right? So these are practical issues that arise. Now let me go into some of the legal issues that arise, right? The first crucial legal issue is that of an accepted matter. A lot of construction contracts will provide that the certain issues arising out of certain clauses in the contract have to be decided by the engineer or the chief engineer. And then the arbitration clause will say all disputes between parties, except for disputes arising out of so and so, or except for disputes left to the sole discretion of the chief engineer, shall be decided by arbitration. So in all these cases, an argument of accepted matter would be raised as a preliminary objection under Section 16 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. The argument would be that this is an issue that fell under Clause 20. Clause 20 is an accepted matter. Only the engineer can decide. Arbitrator is not competent. Now, your remedy, if it actually falls under Clause 20, is whatever decision the engineer takes, against that you can only file a civil suit. You're not entitled to go for arbitration, right? So therefore, and it really turns on the wordings of the contract. But what is important to keep in mind is that accepted matter clauses are strictly construed, right? So for instance, if this clause 20 that I'm referring to says that the engineer can decide on the extension of time to be granted, it will only mean that a decision on whether or not EOT must be granted can be gone into only by the engineer. If you are making a claim for delay damages, that will not be covered within the ambit of the clause. I'm giving this specific example because I've come across this very issue in multiple arbitrations, where the employer will try and widely construe a clause and then say this entire issue of delay damages is not arbitrable. Right? There are judgments which say you must narrowly, strictly construe such a clause. Second is that authority must have also acted and taken a decision under that clause. So sometimes a claim would have been made. Let's assume that the accepted matter clause is wide enough to cover delay damages. A claim is made, but that authority does not decide within a reasonable period. Then, having failed to decide it, the employer cannot then take the stand that the accepted matter clause would apply and that the dispute is not arbitrable. Therefore, first is that the dispute must fall specifically within the ambit of the clause. And the second is that the authority under the clause must have applied its mind, acted, and taken a decision under that clause. Only then will an accepted matter clause be applicable. If not, it would be the claim would certainly be arbitrable. Right? There are also multiple other instances. I'm not going to get into every instance. For instance, sometimes issues of delay would arise both in the claim and counterclaim. So where the employer submits to the jurisdiction of the tribunal by raising counterclaims on the very same issues of delay, but takes the objection that issues of delay are not arbitrable because they fall within the accepted matter clause, then the employer is deemed to have submitted to the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal on the issue of delay and cannot then object to its jurisdiction. So there are multiple ways of getting over it. I'm just setting out some of the key issues that arise in relation to accepted matter. The second is exclusion clauses. I set out some examples of exclusion clauses. When you read these clauses in the PowerPoint, you will see that some of them say that for specific breaches, no delay damages are payable. There are others which say that whatever the nature of the breach, for instance, you look at this 8.3, right? Failure or delay by the employer or the engineer to hand over to the contractor the site or any part of the works, or to give necessary notice to commence works, or to provide necessary drawings or instructions. Very, very widely worded clause. None of this will entitle the contractor to damages or compensation. Now, this is a very common clause you will find in a number of general conditions of contract of multiple PSUs, right? You will find, I'm not getting into each exception to an exclusion clause because there are 25 judgments on the point and I can speak on this for 1.5 hours. But you will find about 10 judgments that say that such a clause is applicable and the contractor is barred. 10 judgments of the Supreme Court, starting from ONGC versus, the latest being ONGC versus Vic Brothers. You have an old case, Ramaswamy's case, Ramchandra Reddy's case. The latest is ONGC versus Vic Brothers and Virendra Constructions. You have a number of other judgments of equal bench strength that do not refer to these 10 and carve out exceptions. What is important to note is that none of the judgments refer to the judgments on the other side. So ONGC versus Vic Brothers is a recent judgment, but it will not refer to any of the judgments that carve out an exception. So the only way to harmonize them is that in the specific fact situation recognized in the cases that carve out exceptions, exclusion clauses will not be a bar to damages, right? So let me set out some of the popular ones here. I'm not going to get into each aspect. One is, if the contractor at the stage of seeking an extension of time puts the employer on terms that it would be claiming damages or compensation for the extended period, and the employer accepts such performance without demur, then the employer cannot then take advantage of the exclusion clause. This is the most popular exception, referred to as the Sarvesh Chopra exception. Exceptions have also been recognized in the context of extreme delay. Extreme delay caused only by one party. So if the employer is responsible for all the delays and the delay is significant, then the employer cannot take advantage of an exclusion clause and say that no compensation is payable. Now, what is an extreme delay? There are multiple judgments. I think the best rationalization is the Delhi High Court division bench, which states that the test is whether there's a doubling of time. So does a 24-month contract become a 48-month contract? It becomes 48 months or more, and the entire delay is caused by one of the parties, then an exclusion clause will not apply. Then you have the Delhi High Court judgment in Simplex, where the view that has been taken is that exclusion clauses are void as they violate public policy of India. The rationale is that if you say that a party can breach to whatever extent they want, but no damages are payable, that hits at the very foundation of contract law. Therefore, it is contrary to Section 73 of the Indian Contract Act, and as a result, also contrary to Section 23 of the Indian Contract Act, which talks about if something is impermissible, is against public policy, or is forbidden by law, then in such a situation, a contract that is contrary to such stipulations would be void. Right? Therefore, there are other exceptions based on the old English concept of fundamental breach. There are some High Court judgments. There's an Andhra Pradesh High Court judgment that relies upon it and carves out an exception. There are arguments you can make on based on Section 54 of the Contract Act, failure to perform reciprocal promises. There are multiple arguments that you can make. I'm just giving you a flavor, because otherwise that's a topic by itself. Another very, very crucial issue is no claim certificate. A lot of general conditions of contract say that prior to payment of final bill, no claim certificate has to be submitted by the contractor. The clause that I have set out is from the General Conditions of Contract of Steel Authority of India. Now, contractors are forced to give this because usually the final bill amount is a substantial value. And by giving this, they've effectively extinguished their own claim for any delay damages or any other claims that they may have. Now, the Supreme Court in R.L. Kalatia's case has taken a view that signing of a no-claim certificate will not operate as a bar from claiming additional amounts. Right? This makes an exception to the general rule. The general rule, and you'll find a plethora of cases on the general rule. I think one case that you can look at is Bogra Polyfabs, which will set out the entire law on this. Usually you must prove financial duress. But R.L. Kalatia seems to carve out an exception in the context of construction contracts. So how we pitch the argument is that R.L. Kalatia reverses the position. There is a presumption of financial duress in the context of construction contracts, which the other side must disprove. That's the way we try and rationalize R.L. Kalatia and the earlier judgments. Right? R.L. Kalatia is a very crucial case when it comes to issuance of no claim certificate. Then you have other issues of non-completion of snag works, where which sometimes that delays the project. There's this concept of practical completion in England. Again, I'm not going to get into all of this. Auditor testifying, I've already dealt with. So these are, well, this is a very wide area. There are a lot of intricate issues such as concurrent delays. There are other issues I may not have touched upon. I may not have gone into everything exhaustively. The idea was to give you a flavor of this area. How do you build a construction claim? How, starting from the basics to some of the common issues that arise. Now I think over to Rohit to give you the nitty-gritties about delay analysis and proving causation.
Thank you, Anirudh. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rohit Singhal. I am, first of all, like to put a disclaimer that I am not a lawyer. I'm an engineer. So maybe I look that majority of the people who are participants over here have legal and law background. So I am the odd one out. But surely I have some degree of knowledge related to construction law. I appear as expert in construction arbitrations and engineering disputes. both within India and outside India. And I represent a company called Mason, which is one of the leading consultants and experts for construction disputes. Anirudh has set the stage very rightly by giving you, a high-level analysis of how to set up a construction claim, how to put up a claim, and all. I like to keep this discussion slightly simple so as to, rather than going into complex engineering assessments, I'll keep it simple and I'll, tell you how to, what are the types of contracts, how to handle construction claims and all. So I'll share a small screen, which is basically what are the topics which I intend to cover during my this presentation. Are you able to see the screen? Anirudh, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, we are able to see it.
Okay. So let me just simply go to the last slide, which covers what are the topics which I intend to take up during this small talk of 15-20 minutes with you all. Number one, I will talk about the type of contracts, that what are the various types of contracts which exist in the construction industry. Number two, I'll talk about delay claims. You must have heard, Anirudh, and majority of the people who have been involved with this industry, construction industry, know that a large chunk of projects get delayed because of various reasons. Then third point which I'm going to cover during my this small talk is the COVID-19 related claims. The construction industry has been seriously affected because of this COVID-19 related issues, and this is one of the industry which has been most affected and seriously affected because of COVID-19 claims. And as a result of which contractors and employers are arguing and discussing among themselves about the COVID claims. And then the last topic which I'm going to cover is why experts are required in handling construction disputes. So these are the four broad topics which I'm going to cover. First and foremost, let me talk about the type of contracts which are prevalent in India in the construction sector. The very first type of contract which is there between an employer and a contractor is what we call as a EPC contract. EPC means engineering, procurement, and construction contracts. Now, engineering, procurement, construction contracts are basically a kind of a lump sum contract where a employer or a developer says to the contractor, "Here is my land. Please design the whatever the building or the residential complex or the power plant, purchase whatever is required, do whatever engineering which is required, and finally do the construction and hand it over to me." This is more of a kind of a lump sum turnkey kind of a contract, though not exactly lump sum turnkey, but for the sake of simpleness and rather to remove the complexity, I'll say it's a full lump sum turnkey kind of a contract where right from the design of the project till the final construction and handover is done by the contractor. In this case, whatever changes are taking place, changes in quantities, changes, other changes, etc., are generally expected to be part of the scope of the contractor, and the risk related to these changes is part of the scope of the contractor. Why does an employer does that? Because employer does not want to take the headaches of the risks related to the construction industry, like for example, change in quantities, change in other design conditions and all. So he says, contractor, I'm handing over the entire risks onto you. The second type of contract is what we call as the unit rate or the reimbursable type of a contract. So for example, let's say a road construction has to be done. The road has to be constructed, which is 50 kilometers wide. So in that, if there is a unit rate for every meter of the road, every kilometer of the road, there is a separate rate for a number of bridges which are coming on the road. There is a separate rate for the extent of footpath which is there in the on sides of the road. So there, that kind of a road is, that kind of a project is called a unit rate or a reimbursable project. In this, the design is generally done by the employer or the developer, and he gives the drawings to the contractor, and the contractor simply constructs as per the drawings given by the employer. And then the third is the build, own, operate type of a project, which is nowadays called PPP project, or BOT project. So a lot of road projects, as you must be aware, are done on a BOT basis. In this, the contractor is given just a piece of land, and the contractor is expected to build the land, convert it into a road, and operate the road for probably a period of 30 years, 25 years, collect the toll on the road, and finally, after that period of 30 years, transfer the road back to the developer or the employer. So National Highway Authority of India does a lot of BOT projects for road construction. So these are the three type of main type of contracts. Of course, there are more type, but these are the three most prevalent type of contracts which are there. Now, why I touched base upon the type of contracts is because the claims in each of these contracts are quite different. For example, EPC contract. In an EPC contract, what is expected by the employer or the developer who is developing the project is that the entire risk for whatever happens is taken by the contractor. But that is something which is completely difficult and impossible. How can a contractor, when he's entering into a contract, anticipate extensive amount of risks which may come onto him during the course of execution? So therefore there are certain guidelines, contract specifications, contract terms and all, which forms the basis for the contractor to put in his price. Let's say, if I'll give you a very simple example. If you have to construct your house, you tell to your house construction contractor, I need a 5 BHK single story house. That's it. And you tell him that you have to use a cement of this grade or of this brand. You tell him that you have to use the fittings and bathroom fittings, etc., of this type. So you define a very high level details and give it to the contractor. The contractor then goes and engineers and designs the house. He thinks that, okay, this is the place where I'm going to keep the kitchen, this is the place I'm going to keep the bedroom and all. He will prepare the design, he will give it to you for your approval, and based on that you will say, fine, please go ahead and construct it. Now what happens when you say, oh, I need a gold plated window frame in my house? So contractor will say, you never told me that you need a gold plated window frame in the house. But your answer could be, I gave you a lump sum contract, I told you I need 5 bedroom house, I need this kind of a bathroom fitting, and it's a lump sum contract for you, so therefore I have the right to demand anything and everything. Now this is one of the areas of dispute which typically happens in an EPC contract. Now imagine you have a power project or you have a big oil and gas refinery project where EPC is there. The employer would want to have everything and anything from the contractor, but the contractor might not have estimated all these things in his price. So that is the reason you have a lot of disputes under EPC. Then the second type of contract, I'm giving you the example, the unit rate contract. In this, what you do is, when you have to construct your house, you will tell to the contractor, this is the drawing of the house, this is the number of bathrooms, this is the number of rooms, this is the type of fittings, this is the number of fittings, this is the type of window frame and all that. And against that, he will give his prices, and based on that, he will execute the job. Now in this, the risk is yours. Tomorrow you want to change the grade of a window from a normal thing to a gold plated one, you will be making that extra payment to him. So therefore the chances of dispute in a unit rate or a reimbursable type of contract are less. The third type, as I said, is build, own, operate, which is generally, this example might not be applicable on a house project, but in a build, own, operate project, what you do is, like a road project, you have seen Delhi Panipat highway, Delhi Noida highway, Delhi Gurgaon highway, all these big highways which are there, they are run on a BOT basis, which means the contractor is told, you will prepare and construct this entire road, collect the toll from this road, and then compensate yourself for the construction cost and your profits. Now what happens, many a times there are disputes in BOT projects because the contractor at the time of entering the contract thinks that I will get 100 cars per day to move on this road, but what he gets actually is 50 cars. Now that is the risk which he has to take. Alternatively, another dispute which is common in the road projects is that the government comes up with a parallel road to the road which is constructed by the contractor. Therefore, the entire traffic gets diverted to the new road, and as a result of which the toll collection ability of the contractor reduces. So that is another type of dispute in a BOT contract. Now let me talk about what is called as the delay claims. As Anirudh explained, in almost every project in India and abroad, it's normal that a project will get delayed for various reasons. I would not like to touch upon that reasons. Now, what happens? Is it the contractor who has delayed the project, or is it because of the reasons that the developer or the employer has delayed the project becomes the area of dispute or area of contention? And both the parties are fighting. You will see exchange of documents, letters and all, where one party will blame the first party, you delayed the project, the second party, which is the contractor, will blame the employer, you delayed the project, and hence that leads to dispute. A contractor will ask for extra money because he has spent more time at the site. An employer will say, no, because you delayed my job, I could not achieve the benefits which were to come from this project for that delayed duration. Therefore, you compensate me by way of delayed damages or liquidated damages, whatever the provisions of the contract are there. Now, as Anirudh explained, not every delay delays the project. There is a concept called critical delay. So only delays which are critical are delaying the project. So let's say if employer says, contractor, you have caused 100 delays, contractor says, employer, you have caused 200 delays. Not every delay has contributed to the delay of the project. There are only some delays which have contributed to the delay of the project. Anirudh gave you an example, very simple example of a table in a room and all. I'll give you another example, which we face on a day-to-day basis. Let's say, you have to go from your home to your office. It takes half an hour for you to go from your home to your office. One of your colleagues also has to go from his home to the same office, and it takes 15 minutes for the colleague to reach from his home to that office. Now imagine you started 5 minutes late from from your home to reach to your office. This means that if you started at 8:35 and you were to reach originally at 9 o'clock, you will probably reach at 9:05. The other colleague has also started late, but he has started at 8:47. He was to start at 8:45 because it was to take 15 minutes for him to reach from his home to this office, but instead he started 2 minutes late. Now there is a delay of 5 minutes because of you. There is a delay of 2 minutes because of the other colleague of yours. Now, which of them is going to delay ultimately is going to be, let's say both of you have to reach in order to start the office. It is your delay in starting by 5 minutes, which is going to delay the opening of the office, and therefore the office is going to open at 9:05. Now, this concept is called critical delay. The delay of your colleague of 2 minutes did not delay the opening of the office. It is your delay of 5 minutes which delayed the opening of the office. Now, this concept is called critical delay. And imagine in a complicated project where so many delays are taking place, which delay ultimately has delayed the end date of the project is of essence and is of importance. Therefore, unless your employer delay or your delay is critical, it cannot be considered in the court of law or in arbitration to be a reason for delay of the project. And how do you do so? In a complicated projects where thousands of works are going on, how do you determine that which delay is critical, which delay is not critical, and both the parties are fighting on with each other saying that you have caused the delay or the other party says you have caused the delay. This is done through what we call as a delay analysis. Delay analysis is basically a method or a forensic way of calculating which delays of which party has caused critical delay and to what extent. By way of delay analysis, let's say if a project is delayed by 100 days, we are able to quantify that how many days of delay is because of a contractor and how many days of delay is because of a employer. So you are able to very easily calculate and finally tell to the arbitrator or to the court that this is the number of delays because of contractor, this is the number of delays because of employer. Now this delay analysis is done using the various schedules, programs of works which have been established during the project execution. And there are standards, international standards, which determine how a delay analysis has to be done, what is the way of a way and method in which delay analysis is to be done, and this is done by people like us, experts like us. So if there is a situation where both the parties are arguing who is responsible for delay, the first and foremost what you need is to undertake a delay analysis to find out which party is responsible for delay. Now, what may also happen, what we call as concurrent delays, is that both employer and contractor have concurrently or parallelly caused the delay. Now, in this case, generally, Anirudh would be more, appropriate to answer this, where both the parties have contributed to the delay of the project. When a concurrent delay happens, in that case, contractor is entitled to extra time but no cost. So a contractor cannot claim extra cost from the employer. He can take extra time. Therefore, he will have extra time to get a waiver or a postponement of his liquidated damages because of delay. So this is the concept of concurrent delay, and this is the concept of what we call as the delay analysis. So therefore, unless and until a delay analysis is done to find out which delay of which party has caused the delay, it is very difficult to resolve delay claims. And what happens is the parties keep on shouting, you have caused the delay, you have caused the delay. There are numerous letters which are written by both parties alleging delay on the other party, but ultimately who has caused the delay, nobody is able to quantify without delay analysis. Unfortunately, in Indian construction disputes, this concept of delay analysis is still quite naive and is new. But in international arbitrations, no construction arbitration will be done without this delay analysis, without a delay expert testifying that who has caused the actual delay. Now let me move to the next topic, which is the very prevalent topic today, is what we call as the COVID-19 related claims. As most of you are aware, the country and the world has been going through these tough times because of coronavirus, and construction industry in particular has been seriously affected because of coronavirus. Now, what happens is the loss which a contractor is going to face because of his workers leaving site, because of the delay in the work, because of workers not coming back, because of supplies not coming on time. Who is going to pay the cost for all these delays which are taking place because of sole reason of corona is the point of contention. So today, as I speak and as Anirudh and me are speaking, there is not even a single construction contract which is not affected by corona and COVID-19 delays and disruptions. And almost all contractors are raising claims on the employer because of COVID-19, where they are saying that because of the lockdown, because of workers leaving site, because of supply delays, there is an extensive delay in the projects. Some of the subcontractors, vendors have become bankrupt, so therefore they are not able to supply the things. Then another very typical claim which is coming out because of COVID-19 or corona is the disruption claim. Imagine previously in a project site, in one car, in one Bolero or a Scorpio, there could be 5 people who could be accommodated to go to the site. But today, because of social distancing, the number of people who are sitting in one car is only 2 or 3. Now, what do you mean? So this means you will mobilize more number of cars. Now, who is going to pay for it? Is it the employer or is it the contractor? So this event is being treated in various courts. Anirudh is the best person to say about this. It is being considered whether as a force majeure event or it is being considered as a change of law, or it is being considered as a frustration of contract. Now everybody is thinking about it, how a contractor is going to raise its claim for COVID-19 related issues onto the employer. Government has come out with circulars where it is saying give time, don't pay cost. Now ultimately contractor is losing money. How is he going to recover this cost is a big question. Now a word of caution over here is for the contractors and the employers is, if a contractor has not yet raised a claim for COVID-19, he should immediately raise a claim. Prepare a list of what are the people who have been affected, what are the equipments which have become idle, or what are the other delays which have taken place because of COVID-19 and corona related issue, and log the claims with the employer. Now what we as professionals and experts in construction law are seeing, that one or the other day this matter will definitely be decided by the Supreme Court of India, but your claims have to be logged, looking at what are your contract terms. Generally under force majeure, the contract terms are give time, don't give cost. But there are other contracts wherein in certain contracts even force majeure cost is being given. So you need to read your contract terms and lodge your claims for COVID-19 claims, which will be a delay claim and your idling or the loss of productivity claim. If you go to our website, which is www.masonproject.com, you will see an article which tells what are the ways and constituents of a COVID-19 claim. Now, lastly, I will touch upon why do you need an expert in construction disputes. As I said, construction dispute is an engineering dispute wherein it's a complicated combination of legal issues and engineering issues which are there for the arbitrators and judges to decide upon. Now many a times, or rather majority of the times, the judges are from the legal background, and they do not understand what is engineering, what is construction. I have come across several cases where if you have a refinery project or you have a petrochemical project, a judge would not have ever visited in his lifetime a refinery or a petrochemical, and imagine he has to decide on a complicated 1,000+ crore rupees of a dispute related to who has delayed the refinery. And in a refinery there are several items, several equipment, several units, so which a legal judge might not be able to decide. Therefore there is this concept of independent experts, wherein, and it is very very common in international arbitrations, and in Indian arbitrations also it is coming up very heavily, especially in construction disputes. Now the concept of independent expert is that these experts are appointed by both claimant and the respondent. They are being paid by the claimant and the respondent, but their duty is towards the arbitration panel, and whatever they are going to say under the oath and an affidavit has to be true, and they will be there to support the tribunal in the form of trying to come to a right decision. There is also concept of tribunal appointed experts, but many of the times, or most of the times, we have seen that arbitration panels are reluctant to appoint their own experts and rather rely on the party appointed experts. And then by getting these party appointed experts cross examined by the lawyers of the other side, they are able to understand which expert has taken the right decision. In an international arbitration, as I told you, no construction arbitration is done without such an expert being there. In India, you see more and more construction arbitrations are looking at the requirement of experts who will be there to say that yes, there has been a delay in the project, let's say 100 days, 50 days is because of employer, 50 days is because of contractor, this is the extent of concurrent or parallel delay, and this is the amount of money which can be paid to the contractor, or this is the amount of liquidated damages which should be levied. So the role of experts is extremely essential. And again, on our website you will see articles which define what and how an expert can help a construction dispute. I think I'll try to keep it simple, and looking at the paucity of the time, I'd like to stop here, and I'll give it to Mr. Vikas and Anirudh to take it forward. Thank you.
Mr. Rohit, there couldn't be a better way to explain a vast topic in a more lucid manner, and that too in a keeping in view the time constraint. Time is not the issue. The issue is only that one should have a broader idea. Then they can always, like you said, visit your website, or they can have, once you have a peep in, then one can always do. There are a few questions, primarily right now they have been posted to you. Can we stop the share screening, Mr. Rohit?
Yes, please.
Yeah. This is by Atif Ahmed. In concurrent delays, this is to Mr. Rohit only. In concurrent delays, the rule that a contractor is entitled only to extension time and not costs, an absolute, or is there any exception to claim damages? Mr. Anirudh can also answer it.
Yeah, so let me answer it, then I'll hand it over to Anirudh. So, the concept of concurrent delay is a complicated concept. On a simpler note, what is meant by concurrent delay is that both the contractor and employer together at the same time are causing what we call as critical delays. Therefore, the delay to the end date of the project is parallelly caused at the same time by the contractor and the owner or the employer. But example, if a contractor has not mobilized his resources at site, therefore there is a delay of the contractor. But parallelly, if the employer has not given the land, then there is a delay of the employer. Now, in this situation, what you do is you try to find out which is the dominant delay. So definitely, for everybody who understands construction, if land is not there, what will the contractor do by mobilizing his resources? He will face more losses. So why will a contractor mobilize his resources when the land is not there? So therefore, in a situation where there is a delay of this type and the delay of the employer is on the dominant nature, then this is not treated as a concurrent delay. And then in that case, the contractor is entitled to time as well as cost. Vice versa, if you have a different situation where a contractor has not mobilized his resource, but the employer has given all the drawings, maybe the last 5 pieces of drawings are not given. So the delay is dominantly now by the contractor. So in that case, even though it's a concurrent delay, a dominant delay is of the contractor, but still an extension of time is the entitlement of the contractor, but no cost. So therefore, concurrency itself is a very complicated topic, but there are 7 tests of a delay to be categorized as a concurrent delay, one of which is the dominant delay concept. And again, on our website, we have got articles on concurrent delay. And people who want to understand more about construction law can simply go to Google and type Society of Construction Law Delay Protocol. Society of Construction Law Delay Protocol. It's an international standard which talks about all the possible modes and guidelines on delay disputes, and this is available free of cost, and this is issued by what we call as the Society of Construction Law from London, which has got an office in India as well. Hope I've clarified the question. Thank you.
If I may just add to this, now once the issue is, once you decide whether or sorry,
Nothing.
you have to decide on whether or not the delay is actually concurrent. That is, are both delays of almost equal causative effect. That is where you will be relying upon expert testimony and arguments that one delay is more dominant and the other is not dominant. But stage 2 is, once it is established that the delays are concurrent, then what? The approach that has been set out by English courts is referred to as the Malmason approach. That is, that you are only entitled to time, you're not entitled to compensation in case of concurrent delays. This is based on a principle called the prevention principle. That is, that your concurrent delay also prevented the other party from performing. Therefore, you cannot be entitled to compensation. The American approach is a little different. It's referred to as the apportionment approach, where they say, okay, if there are concurrent delays for 6 months, and broadly equal causative effect, then it is, you can apportion it 3 months each. For 3 months, the contractor can claim time and can claim compensation. For 3 months, the employer can claim liquidated damages, assuming the rest of the tests, like employer having suffered loss, is met. Now, when you look at Indian case law, you have the Delhi High Court. Primarily, you'll have judgments of Delhi and Bombay. Delhi would have mostly followed the Malmaison approach, and Bombay would have followed the apportionment approach. Now, there is one hint in a Supreme Court judgment. The issue did not come up, but the arbitrator would have followed the apportionment approach. Ultimately, the award would have been upheld. It would have gone before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court and Assam State Electricity Board would have taken the view that the arbitral award is in fact reasonable. Maybe this can be used as justifying the apportionment approach when you argue before a tribunal. But these are the two broad approaches. Under the apportionment, you may still be able to maintain a claim. But I think when you look at it theoretically, the Malmaison approach is the correct approach. And it is there's a lot of criticism that you will find of the apportionment approach, including in the Society of Construction Law literature. There's a detailed paper by the Society of Construction Law analyzing this issue.
This is again to Mr. Singhal. Could you explain the global claims approach in relation to a causation?
Yes. So basically, what are global claims? Global claims are that I, as a contractor, simply says, look, my project is delayed because of 5 delays of the employer, and I estimated my project to be of 100 crore rupees. Now it has become 150 crore rupees, and therefore I am raising this 50 crore rupees as a claim onto the employer. Now this is a concept of a global claim. Now the reason why global claims is being raised, because the contractor does not have details to establish his case, or does not, has documents and evidences to go down to the nitty-gritties to say, no, these are the 5 delays. This is the effect of delay number 1. This is the effect of delay number 2. And this is the effect of delay number 3, 4, 5. And accordingly, therefore, I am making my fully detailed case. Now, generally, in the arbitration panels and courts, Anirudh can add more to it, global claims are not, are considered positively. They are considered as quite, at a higher level. Although there are instances under English law where, global claim under quantum Marriott has been considered as well. But generally, my suggestion to all the contractors and even the employers who are reviewing the claim is, please do not take and submit global claims. Always have documentation and papers ready, and submit your claims in details, because you run the risk of getting your claims rejected by the tribunal if they are on a global basis.
Anirudh, you want to add something?
Nothing much to add on concept, but you can look at one judgment of the English court. I think it's Court of Appeal in Water Lilies case. That will summarize the entire principle, and the entire march of law on global claims will be set out in that judgment.
I see there is a question which has been raised to be by Mr. Kathiravan about which is the method of delay analysis which is preferable to prove delays of the employer.
Yes.
Now, to answer this, there are several methods of delay analysis. On a very broad level, the delay analysis can be either prospective delay analysis or retrospective delay analysis, right? Prospective delay analysis means forward-looking analysis. Retrospective delay analysis means backward-looking analysis. Now, I gave you an example of a delay of 2 people reaching to their office. Now, I'll give you an example. On the same example, I will explain the 2 types of delay analysis. Imagine that, as I told you, that you were to start from your home to the office at 8:30. You started at 8:35. Therefore, you are going to reach your office at 9:05. Your other colleague, which is 15 minutes away from the office, started at 8:47 instead of 8:45. Therefore, he is going to reach the office at 9:02. Now, if I do a delay analysis at 8:40 a.m., then in that case, your colleague has not yet started from his home because he has to start at 8:45, but there is a delay of 5 minutes because of you. Therefore, what I will say is that there is a 5 minutes delay because of you, and you will reach 5 minutes delay to the office, and therefore office will open at 9:05. Now imagine that your colleague starts at 8:55. He is 10 minutes delayed. But because I did my delay analysis at 8:40, I have no idea what time your colleague is starting. I only say that you have delayed reaching the office, or you are going to be delayed reaching the office, and therefore there is a 5 minutes delay. Vis-a-vis, if I do the delay analysis after the opening of the office at 9:10, and now I know that your colleague reached at 9:10, you reached at 9:05, therefore you were not delayed, it was your colleague who was delayed. Now what I did is, I did the delay analysis after the reaching of the office, which is the completion of the project, which is what is called retrospective analysis, means looking back once the project is finished. A prospective analysis is looking future. At 8:40, I am looking at the fact that office was to start at 9, but you are delayed in starting to the office by 5 minutes. Therefore, you will reach 5 minutes late. Now, these are the two fundamental concepts of prospective and retrospective analysis. Now, to answer which is the most preferable way of delay analysis, under these two broad methods of delay analysis, you have got various other methods of delay analysis. Generally, for a contractor, a prospective method of delay analysis is most favorable. It will give the maximum entitlement of time to a contractor. But an employer would be smart and should be smart to say, no, I will not accept a prospective method of delay analysis. I would like to see a retrospective method of delay analysis. Now, under prospective method of delay analysis, there is two types of method. One is called impacted as planned method of delay analysis. Second is called a time impact method of analysis, TIA method of analysis. Now, impacted as planned method of analysis is the most favorable method for a contractor, but least favorable for an employer. Now, it depends what is your strategy, how do you want to do it. In an arbitration, only retrospective methods of delay analysis are acceptable. Prospective methods of delay analysis are not acceptable, because the arbitration panel wants to see and is there to see what happened in the project in the past. They are not established during the project, so generally they will look from at the end, from the end of the project, to what happened to determine who is responsible.
Now, this question is by Pranav Kohli. When the dominant delay is on the part of the employer, however, an extension is granted based upon the reasons of delay attributable to the employer, can the employer incorporate a condition that extension is granted, but without any cost/financial implication?
Yeah, so these are very often.
Yeah, this is, I think Anirudh just now said, these are what we call as the exclusion clauses, that time is given but cost is not given, either because in the contract such a condition exists, or the employer on his own says, I will give time and I'll not give cost. But this is what I think Anirudh is the best person to explain. Legally, it is not tenable. Anirudh.
Yeah, so there are, as I was mentioning, there are multiple exceptions that have been carved out by courts in relation to such clauses. I mentioned the Sarvesh Chopra exception. That is where the contractor puts the employer on terms about its intention to claim damages at the stage of seeking extension of time, and the employer accepts this without demur, then the contractor can claim damages notwithstanding such a clause. Second exception that I mentioned was the case of extreme delay of usually more than doubling of the project time, and where the entire delay is caused only because of the employer. Then employer cannot take advantage of such a clause. You have multiple other arguments that one can make, like an argument that the clause is void in light of the judgment of the Delhi High Court in Simplex, where they say that it hits at the very foundation of contract law. You also have two other judgments, two other approaches based on the old English concept of fundamental breach, You have the American concept of doctrine of active interference. I'm just throwing up all of this. There are usually 6-7 alternative grounds that you take to argue that such a clause will not apply. There are about 30 to 35 judgments on the point, and you'll find a number of contradictory judgments as well. So it's based on the individual fact situation. You will have to decide which argument you want to pitch aggressively. Now, when I look at the question, I think it's a little wider. You're looking at not just the exclusion clauses, but you're also looking at the scenario where there is no clause, but at the stage of seeking extension of time, the employer says, I'm not going to pay you damages, and the contractor then performs. That is the reverse of the Sarvesh Chopra test. And I think there's a Calcutta High Court judgment and there's a Madhya Pradesh High Court judgment. I don't recollect the name, but I know that the Madhya Pradesh High Court judgment was authored by Justice Deepak Mishra when he was the Chief Justice of the High Court. So both these judgments say that Sarvesh Chopra would equally apply to the opposite scenario. That is where the employer puts the contractor on terms that nothing will be payable, and the contractor accepts that and performs, then the contractor cannot claim. Therefore, in a fact-specific situation of this nature, a contractor cannot claim. But if generally there's an exclusion clause, a contractor can claim, subject to the contractor falling in one of the exceptions that I just mentioned.
Now the question is by Jamaluddin Sheikh. How concurrent delay can be established and why cost cannot be given to the contractor where client is also responsible for the same partially?
So there are two parts to this question. One part is how concurrent delay can be established. Now, concurrent delay can be established by way of what we call as a concurrency delay analysis, wherein you take up the schedules and the contemporaneous delays which have taken place, and then you find out using the delay analysis, schedule analysis, that who has delayed and whether the delays of the employer and contractor are critical, and if they are critical, are they concurrent? If they are concurrent, do they pass the 7-stage test of concurrency, and which one of them is dominant? So to summarize, concurrency analysis is required to prove which is concurrent delay and how much is the concurrent delay. The second part of the question is, why cannot the contractor be paid if client is also responsible partially for the delay? Now, when you say concurrent delay means client is not responsible partially, both the parties are responsible equally. The moment you have a concept that client is responsible partially, therefore there is a dominant delay of the client and a non-dominant delay of the contractor, then definitely the contractor is entitled to get extra money, even though there is so-called concurrent delay. So therefore, what happens is the people have to understand that once you have done the concurrency analysis and you determine that which of the delays of the parties are concurrent, then you do the 7-test step to find out which is dominant and which is not dominant. And then you determine that whether really, in spite of the so-called concurrent delay situation being there, still the client is partially responsible. And as Anirudh said, then you try to argue the apportionment approach rather than the approach wherein only time is given and no cost is given. But let me explain to you on a practical basis. In Indian arbitrations, I have rarely seen that a concurrency analysis is done and this kind of an extensive, discussions are done. Generally, I have seen, that if the client is arguing that there is a concurrent delay, an employer is arguing that by way of delay analysis, you are able to show to the arbitration panel that no, there are no concurrent delays, and therefore you are able to argue that. However, when you go to international arbitrations, where the tribunals are consisting of construction law experts and all who understands all these concepts, there definitely you need to be more, as an expert, I need to be more prepared to find out which is concurrent, which is not concurrent, and then do the test to determine which is dominant among those concurrent delays.
This is by Shiv. When escalation is payable, but other heads of delay damages are not payable due to a bar in the contract, can we still argue that such bar is not applicable in the light of the exceptions you have mentioned?
Yes, see, now what you're raising is a very important issue, because from the cases that I mentioned, the test in Sarvesh Chopra explicitly is wide enough to cover all heads of delay damages. But when you look at the extreme delay test, the Satyapalan test, factually it was a case of no escalation. It was not a case of no delay damages. Therefore, there are arguments that the other side would make, the employer would make, stating that should be restricted only to a escalation clause. But the counter to this is, logically, if it should apply to a escalation clause, it should also apply with equal force to a delay damages clause, because there is conceptually both are different heads. In fact, delay damages, the argument on section 73 and such a clause being void would apply with greater force to delay damages, because escalation is more a means of compensating for actual price rise in relation to materials, labor, etc. Whereas delay damages is your actual claim for compensation under section 73. Therefore, while this argument that you are setting out on the distinction between escalation and delay damages is often raised, and I faced it in a number of arbitrations myself, in principle, there should be no distinction between the two. In terms of the exception being equally applicable, if not with greater force, to delay damages.
So Anirudh has said the very right thing. You see, because of a delay, the employer is ready to give you escalation, which is one part of the loss which a contractor has suffered. But the other part of the loss, which is the loss because of the delays caused by the employer, like extra spending of time at site for camp and other resources and all, is not being paid. So therefore it doesn't make logic. You pay increased price because of delay, but you don't compensate for other constituents of the delay. So therefore, in a situation like this, where you have a clause which allows you to claim escalation, this clauses which Anirudh just now pointed out makes more sense, and therefore your case will be stronger as compared to a situation where neither escalation is paid nor any cost is paid because of delay caused by the employer.
We don't have any other questions. And thank you to all the participants who have joined us on the Facebook as well as on the present platform. And more so to the speakers, that is Mr. Anirudh Krishnan and Mr. Rohit Singhal, who have given the insights, because this is one of the topic which invariably all professionals personally feel that because of this, more so on account of COVID-19, these issues would continue to arise in different courts. And as Mr. Anirudh said, that ultimately there would be some judgment from the Supreme Court coming on this issue, because ultimately somebody would be taking up the matter to the highest court. We are obliged, and on behalf of Beyond Law CLC, we once again thank you everyone, especially the speakers, for giving us the insights on a topic which is of quite relevance, and it would also be relevant for the future. Tomorrow we have a webinar at 4 p.m. by Justice Roshan Dalvi, former judge of the Bombay High Court. She would be speaking on case management. So everyone, we would request, should join the webinar for having the insights on case management. As we all know, Justice Roshan Dalvi is an eloquent speaker and has great insights. So everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you once again. I would request Mr. Rohit and Anirudh to kindly share the notes so that we can share it on the WhatsApp group.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Vikas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you, Anirudh.